Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Possibility Space. My name is Geraldine Cahill, and I'm the Director of Engagement for Social Innovation Canada. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining you from Treaty 6 lands, which is often also known as Alberta. Treaty 6 was first signed in 1876, with additional signings following at multiple points right up until 1950. In fact, 50 nations have signed this treaty, including Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, and Dene peoples. As we begin our introductions, please share where you're joining us from as well in the chat box. Social Innovation Canada is excited to launch the Possibility Space today to celebrate and elevate action-provoking ideas that advance social innovation projects, policies, and activities. The Possibility Space is an event series that intends to center social innovators and the stories and projects many of you are working on. The inspiration behind the name, and I've used it in any number of places, is actually in the introduction to Getting to Maybe, How the World is Changed. This is a seminal social innovation book by Francis Wesley, Brenda Zimmerman, and Michael Quinn Patton. Many of you may have read. I certainly recommend it. And the introduction was actually penned by Rick Young, who wrote in reference to the book's title, "Maybe is not a cautious word. It is a defiant claim of possibility in the face of a status quo we are unwilling to accept." So in a time today of polycrisis, this defiance, this determination to seek better ways to continue to work towards transformation is necessary and deserves to be elevated. Before we move into the theme of today, I want to acknowledge my colleagues who have made this event possible. Kathleen Serra, Digital Communications and Engagement Specialist, and also Emma Carr, who can't be with us today, but is the Operations Manager here at Social Innovation Canada as well. Kathleen, hiding behind the SI logo and under the name of Tech SI Canada, she will be monitoring the chat room today and forwarding to me any questions for the Q&A component of today's session. So let's turn to the topic of the day. Certainly something that is starkly in front of mind for many of us, whether you're in Alberta, British Columbia, or Newfoundland. Fires are burning out of control. And after sweltering conditions in Ontario for several weeks last week, there was severe flooding rains. And while climate change affects us all, it is having a disproportionate impact on equity-seeking groups across the country, including a growing number of Canadians deemed uninsurable. The societal and economic implications of the crisis requires a unified effort to mitigate negative impacts on those most at risk. We need to work collectively to solve this complex challenge across our systems, communities, and identities to address the root causes of climate hazards on people made more vulnerable by systemic inequality. The Climate and Equity Lab is a collaborative initiative by Gore Mutual Foundation, Social Innovation Canada, and York University's Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. And it aims at understanding how these climate change impacts vulnerable groups in Canadian urban areas. During its first phase, which has now come to a close, the lab collaborated with stakeholders to conduct a systematic review of municipal policies addressing housing disparities and climate vulnerabilities for low-income renters, for homeowners and unhoused individuals in Toronto, in Vancouver, and also in the Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge region. And it also hosted workshops where diverse perspectives were shared with more than 100 stakeholders and experts involved, within the climate change adaptation, community resilience, insurance, and housing ecosystems. So today we're going to hear from 4 of those stakeholders, not just about their perspectives on climate change and equity, but also to hear how their work generates outsized positive impacts for their communities every day and feeds into the transformation that we need. Following my conversation with the guests, we'll hear from our lab lead host, Gabby Polanco-Soto, who's the Vice President and Head of Purpose and Sustainability at Gore Mutual. Gabby has 2 exciting announcements to make, and she'll help us close out our event today. But now to our very first possibility space conversation. As I say, joining us are 4 climate and community innovators to discuss how the increased exposure and sensitivity to climate events makes some groups more vulnerable than others to its harshest impacts. This is particularly so for those living in core housing need or below the low-income median. And introducing, in no particular order, Opal Sparks. Opal is a long-time community leader, an advocate and consultant for many years on housing, disability justice, food security, and mental health. Opal's knowledge and expertise on food growing and starting up community food initiatives is grounded in her connection to the land and people. Opal is currently doing research projects with St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, and she's also enjoying doing work with SMA circles this year, as well as helping to maintain the High Park Oak Savannah. Opal recently worked with Greener City as an earth worker with Dunn Garden, and joining Opal as part of the Greener City initiatives is Lynn Walcott, who is the Director of Community Programs and Social Change at West Neighbourhood House in Toronto also. We also will hear from Rowan Gentleman-Sylvester, who is the Executive Director of City Hive, a Metro Vancouver-based nonprofit on a mission to transform the way that young people are engaged in shaping their cities. Since joining the City Hive team in early 2020, she has led countless programs and projects that bring together youth and decision makers on important urban issues, from climate change to public space to affordability and everything in between. She's the former co-chair of Canada's Young Professionals Community of Practice, the IAP2, and her deep expertise in youth engagement and passion for democracy and action has led her to sit on a number of regional and national advisories, shaping the future of youth engagement in this country. Next to her is Nadine Green, the site coordinator at A Better Tent City in Kitchener-Waterloo, in the Kitchener-Waterloo-Cambridge region in Ontario. Nadine has experienced homelessness herself. She sees opportunity and adversity and works tirelessly to support those who have fallen through the cracks. Nadine never walks away from a challenge. For 5 years, Nadine sheltered and cared for people experiencing homelessness in her downtown Kitchener convenience store until she was evicted for doing so in January 2020. She then began to care for the unsheltered folks who can no longer seek shelter in her store with nightly visits to bring them food, tents, and blankets. And then in April 2020, the creator of A Better Tent City, Ron Doyle, invited Nadine to help establish the community. Nadine continues to live on site, and in her role as site coordinator, she manages life at A Better Tent City. So thank you in advance for all of your time and insights today. A quick note for those listening in, there will be time for your questions after we've had some time to cover some ground. So please enter the questions in the chat as you think of them, and Kathleen will make sure that I see them in time. What a great panel! I'm so grateful to have you all here. I'm going to start with you, Nadine. It's summertime and it's hot. For people experiencing homelessness or sleeping rough in our communities, we often hear about extreme cold weather. You know, as Canada it's a cold country at a lot of times. The need to have places to keep warm, but the impacts of extreme heat and then flooding rains are just as dangerous and increasingly more frequent. I wonder if you could tell folks, for people living rough, how do they get through these periods? What happens for folks in this instance? And you're just on mute there. Oh, you've gone. It's a bit harder on a phone, you know, it's a small button on the phone. It's all right. There we go.
Yes, I got it. Sorry.
Not
Sorry
at
about
all.
that.
Please.
Hello, 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 everyone. I heard your question. So in a rainstorm, people can lose everything. They have no place to go to dry, or no place to dry their stuff and to dry, like if it's raining. Imagine being soaked to the bone. Shoes can take days to be fully dried, and you can't leave them anywhere, or they won't be there for you to get back. When it's hot, people aren't always welcome in businesses to cool off, so they have to find shade or a community space. They can't always find a drink, and they have to carry everything they own to look for a cool place to cool off. It's really awful for people who are homeless and people who are outside, and we see it all the time here at our Better 10 City, and we always try to do what we can to help people. It's just an awful life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know we'll talk to a better intensity and the programs that you're providing there, which are life-saving. Opal, I wonder if we could turn to you too, just to fill out the picture too, because situations like that happened in Toronto last week with the flooding, and before that, this very sustained hot weather. For those living in aging high-rise towers in Toronto, many of the communities that you work with on a sort of day-to-day basis, can you help paint a picture of what events like this are like for those communities that you work with?
Okay, I just wanted to add one other piece about the homelessness situation. Is we have a few cooling centers and warming centers according to the weather. Um, one of the things that is really troubling when we're dealing with power outages is the fact that people who need devices because of health concerns could actually lose their life because the devices, during a power outages are out. And then persons like myself who are disabled, when we're placed on higher floors, we have no way of exiting a building. So when people are planning housing for people with disabilities, they really need to make sure that they're on the lower floors and that in the event of any kind of a situation that people are really on hand to assist. One of the things that we have to look at is community care. Um, and that isn't always um, a situation for people to deal with. The other thing when you're thinking about power outages is that food spoilage. Um, and then for people who need air conditioning or people who need heat, it just depends on what time of the year that we're dealing with power outages. And we need to look at specific stations within neighborhoods that have things like generators where people have a space to go to, so that loss of life is decreased. I don't know what is there.
Thanks so much, Opal. That's terrific, just to fill it out there. And I'd like to also offer the same opportunity to Rowan. You know, we're talking about, you know, your main constituents, I guess, if you like, those that you're engaged with most are young people. And you know, while of course they may experience some of the things that Opal and Nadine are also talking about, I'm interested in seeing it also from a, you know, equity in a different sort of in a different vein. I was reading in the media a couple of weeks ago just the high numbers of young people just in the city you live in Vancouver, and in British Columbia generally, that are thinking of moving to another province because the cost of living is so high, and the prospect of them ever owning or even being able to afford to rent in that community is feels increasingly unlikely. You know, before we look at the positive future, of course, that many of these young people would like to create, what do you hear from youth about the experiences of these sort of intersecting challenges?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. And thank you, Nadine and Opal, for setting the context so beautifully about how visceral and how real these realities and the lived experiences of climate change are for so many people. So yeah, City Hive, we work with youth ages 13 to 30, which is an interestingly wide range, I would say. So we're working with teenagers, but also young adults, young parents. And I think in relation to the impacts, these are almost entirely renters, transit users, and folks who are often working in the gig economy, and some of them being students as well, working multiple jobs to try and make ends meet. So those are perspectives that I think when we're talking about policy or decision making at a higher level just aren't a part of the equation in a meaningful way, aren't at the decision making tables alongside the incredible populations that Opal and Nadine were already speaking to so well. So I think to your question, Geraldine, I think the conversations that are really emerging is an interesting time in conversations about climate action with youth, because when I was younger, and I'd say about even 5 years ago, climate action, climate change was kind of its own conversation. It was the conversation on its own. And I think we really are seeing a shift both generationally and socially to talking about what are the intersections of climate and housing, of climate and mental health, of climate and jobs, transportation, all of these other very visceral lived realities. And that's the biggest thing that we're seeing, is that young people aren't interested in just talking about climate action or climate change on its own, but they want to talk about, okay, how is climate change affecting the housing that I'm able to access? You know, does it come with air conditioning? Am I going to have a landlord that's going to, you know, be responsive if there's flooding, if there's other impacts? Do I want to move to, you know, maybe I want to leave the city because I can't afford to live here, but do I want to move to the interior of BC where there's a risk of my house burning down? That's very real, or having to live with smoke for 3 months of the year. So I think those conversations are just becoming so much more embedded in our decision-making processes. And here in BC, we've been dealing with intense wildfire smoke and wildfires for over 10 years now. So it's a whole generation of youth who have now lived and grown up in that world.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and obviously here, I'm southwest of Edmonton, and that the smoke is, you know, it's an everyday for many folks, both in BC and across Alberta as well at this time of year. And so, and I appreciate your comments there in the chat there too from folks that are joining us. What I don't want to be, I'm not going to be flip about the way I've introduced this, but I want to give you a sense of the kinds of intersecting challenges our social innovation lab process tries to uncover as well, as we go into these what we hope will be processes that will generate outcomes and some solutions to some of these complex challenges. These are the kinds of insights that are so critical to understanding just the number of barriers we have to overcome together when we're approaching working together on solutions as well. Nadine, at A Better Tent City, you know, it was set up as a community-based crisis response to unsafe living conditions, and it was exacerbated by the pandemic. Obviously, also, you know, you provide a home, community, connection to services and healthcare, and put people really on a path, 50 people that were previously unsheltered, on a path to more stable, secure living. Can you share some of the experiences that show how living at A Better Tent City has impacted residents' lives?
First of all, I like to say people get rest. When you're walking around with your bags up and down trying to find a spot, when you get a tiny home, you get your rest. I know of one gentleman here, he's been waiting for a house. He's been waiting at A Better Tent City for 2 years for a house. And he finally got in. He's been just sleeping outside, sleeping inside the portables. He would have all of his bags. Like my heart would break. And even when I tried to take the bags from him to put it down, he just walked with all the bags. And then he got his tiny home. And now I see him walking around on site without not even a bag in his hand, because he's got a home. He's got a locked door to put his stuff. People worry about getting their stuff stolen, so they have to do it again. So I've seen him, and as I said, he waited 2 years, because we have a long waiting list here, and people will just wait because they have nowhere to go. And they wait because we have healthy meals. They wait because their friends are here. They wait because we have services here, like the mobile health bus comes by, ID clinic, counseling. If you have your pets, we have the vet that comes on site. And just to see that, because the other people got their houses, but just, you know, I've been watching him like in a good way. And, you know, and just now I see him and he just walks with his head high. Although it's a tiny home that people may call a shed, he's got his own house. He has his key around his neck, you know. It's just, he doesn't notice that I watch him all the time, but he has his key and he walks proudly and he doesn't have a bag in his hand. And he's just happy he can go to the showers. Well, he could go to the showers even if he didn't have a house, but he's just proud, and you can see that he's loving himself. And we love them, but having you love yourself is so important. And I see that.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's such a seemingly simple thing to not have to carry your stuff around all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's the strength in that. I wonder, Opal, if you could build on that, and also Lynn too, if you'd like to. You know, at Greener City, at West, at some of the programs that you've worked at, Opal, as well. You know, there's a range of programs involving access to healthy food, like the healthy food that Nadine spoke to, and protecting and ensuring access to green space. You know, how might we see these types of programs better integrated into how cities are designed or redesigned for meeting climate change?
So I'm just going to speak to that before I speak to greener cities. The thing that it's really helpful is that there's less visits to the emergency room. Greener City, we have partnered with a pilot project, social medicine with Dr. Buzares, that's helping to house at least 51 people. It's a small project, but people that generally, when they're unhoused, they're frequent visitors to emergency rooms. So in order to look at what life looks like when people have constant supportive care for health, because there's going to be a community kitchen in there, so people will be eating healthy foods. We have a person who with means who has sponsored a farmer to donate food so that the community kitchen has nutritious organic foods for people. In that space will also be like a library, and there'll be people coming in to exercise with people and things of that nature. So I think when we look at ways to care for community, it shows that we are mindful that we are all connected. Because when we don't take care of the least of us, at some point, whatever their issues are, they will compromise those of us who are the haves. And so I think I'm really proud to be involved with projects that are mindful of community care.
Mhm.
And then the other thing, there are different cities that we can learn from. For instance, cities like Copenhagen are dealing with waste energy. They have more cyclists. They have energy centers in the city where people are paid for recycling. Just like we have recycling in Toronto at the beer store, but it's not just to recycle your alcoholic containers. They have taken it beyond that. So much so that like 29% of the people own cars, which is really different. Here in Toronto, some of the developers are starting to have no parking garages underneath in order to encourage people not to have cars. When you're looking at places like Singapore, for instance, they have super trees to absorb the CO2 within the city. And they also have a biodiversity project in Slovenia, for instance, which has become the beehive capital of the world because it's looking at like in terms of growing food and things of that nature. But when we look at ways in which we can improve our cities, we create more education, we create job opportunities, we create a quality of life for everybody. It's more inclusive. So these are just some of the ways in which we can improve people's lifestyle. It's something as simple as for all new housing developments, they have rooftop gardens or green walls where things are being grown. Look at places like in Toronto, we have Second Harvest, which takes food from restaurants and delivers it to programs that need where people are food insecure. Look at places like Food Share, which was developed by some mothers in Regent Park who were looking at ways in which people living in poverty could support each other in having food. And just recently, we have a law that was passed thanks to people like Food Share and the Stop. There's a space for children to be fed breakfast, lunch, and snack in the school system. My goodness, because of the Black Panthers Women, Infant, and Children program in the United States was formed so that people could get milk and cheese and peanut butter, so just a few staples, just to add to food security. So these are some of the things that have been done in the past, but now we're improving and adding to incrementally grow towards more communal support, and we're becoming more inclusive. So some of that NIMBYism is slowly disappearing. That's all.
That's so great. Thank you so much. Oh my God. I don't think anyone needs to do any research. Opal, you know all the things. Thank you so much for all those ideas. And what's interesting to me about all the range of programs that you spoke to there was, how communities respond and continue to offer in new ways to enable people to access healthy food and help to foster healthy ecosystems for us, even in our deepest, biggest city systems. I want to turn to Rowan to also offer in some insights, because obviously building off of all of that, and there was a ton in there, can you highlight some of the key priorities and solutions that some of the youth have identified, some of the cohorts in your Youth Climate Innovation Lab, for example, or in the climate action programs? What are you hearing? What are some of the ways that youth are offering in some ways forward?
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I definitely feel like Opal really gave us a masterclass and so many of the different incredible projects that are happening and histories that we're building on and learning from. Yeah, so in our programs, for a little bit of context, we run programs to build the knowledge and the skills and the capacity of young people to engage in local decision making. And we've had a really strong climate focus in an arm of our programs for the last 6 years, recognizing that that's a great way of getting young people interested and passionate in the door, and then using that as a springboard to talk about, what level of government even makes the decisions that impact your day-to-day life. If you're gonna join an advocacy campaign, if you want to go protest, like, who are you actually protesting to? Where are the decisions happening that impact your day-to-day, but also your future? And I think that ends up being one of the key lessons and learnings that comes out of our programs as well, is that young people are saying, what I really want and what I really need is actually a seat at the table. And that seems like such a basic ask, and maybe a little bit but it's shockingly missing. And so many of our decision-making processes, the decisions about, the climate action plans that are being developed, whether it's at your local government level, by our provincial and territorial governments, or at the national government level, the people in those spaces that get to write those plans and write those policies are not the people who are on the front lines living with the most harsh consequences of climate change. And so I think that's the recurring theme of our programs, as well as a little bit of the message of the delivery of the programs themselves, is how can young people be more engaged in talking about, if this policy is implemented in 2, 5, 10 years from now, then it's my history, it's my future that we're talking about. Rather that they really want to be a part of those conversations and be honored for the lived expertise that they hold. I think that's we position ourselves as a bit of a bridging organization. We have really deep relationships with the youth communities we serve, but we also have really strong relationships with civic institutional partners. We work with local governments, and in Metro Vancouver, there's 21 local governments. It's not a mega city like Toronto is. So obviously there's all of the neighboring municipalities in and around Toronto area as well. But we're quite concentrated number of local governments, and so we have 21 local governments, a treaty First Nation, and an electoral area that all have unique jurisdiction to work around this area. And so we have a lot of partners who get to actually be making climate action plans, and we get to say, hey, let's bring some youth to the table, let's engage some young people in the creation of those plans. And they get to say, my experience as a renter, or as a public transit user, as a student, as a hospitality worker, whatever it might be, that's my expertise. I don't need to be a technical expert in the impacts of climate change. I get to share my lived expertise, my day-to-day expertise. And I think Nadine and Opal are speaking so beautifully to this in this conversation as well. So that's, I think, the key theme that we hear again and again and again, no matter what specific content we're talking about in the program.
Yeah, thanks for offering that in, actually. I mean, it's a seat at the table, and it's valuing the contribution that we can all make to these things. And I think in combination with processes that recognize that diverse perspectives are really needed to make headway on these challenges. So, I think this is an important reminder. We have a question from a colleague, actually, Joe, in the chat here, that I'm going to maybe extend to Lynn. I kind of am putting you on the spot, because this was not in the questions I sent in advance, but it directly relates to what we've just been talking about. But on the flip side of this question about having a seat at the table, and please, all panelists chime in if you'd like to contribute to this answer as well. But we've considered what it means to have a seat at the table as someone that's bringing lived experience. What are some of the ways that policymakers and other decision makers can centre the experiences and voices of those most impacted by climate hazards? So aside from a seat at the table, or is that just number one first step? Any thoughts on what else policymakers and other decision makers can do?
Yeah, there have been well, there are so many things, right? That's been there used to be a time when politicians regularly came out to speak to communities to hear what they were doing or thinking or learning, and it was a discussion. It wasn't an opportunity to flout whatever they were passing on, or an opportunity to just before elections. So those kinds of conversations, I think, are would love to see them re-inhabited. I think especially in this time when people have increasing distrust of government officials, we actually, we need to have more of those. Some of the things that have happened in Toronto recently with our new mayor, which are things that I think are helpful. In a number of consultations that they've held lately about the budget, about setting up Wi-Fi, about public access Wi-Fi, about recovery, they actually reached out to organizations that are the kinds of organizations Rowan's talking about, that have good relationships in communities, especially low-income communities and communities that were particularly affected by COVID, and set up a special consultation for them and paid people to participate in them. Which was really great because people often don't have time, and there was also a particular valuing of that voice rather than the tokenism, I think, that we often see. So those are just a couple of things that I think of. We do in our place lots of youth are constantly making videos and sending those out to politicians, and using that as a format to our youth leadership groups are doing that. We're, the usual things like all candidates nights and all those things. But I think this pressure of government to say, you actually need to consult with the people who are most affected in strategic ways are very important.
Yeah. Terrific. Before I ask if others would like to weigh in on that, I'd like to encourage anybody that has a question to put it in the chat. And Kathleen will make sure that I see it if I don't see it myself. So just write it in the chat box there. It's one of the menu items in the Zoom platform. Hopefully you can see that underneath the three dots that say more. If you're unable to write in the chat, raise your hand and I will we'll make sure that you can speak as well.
Can I just add one thing to that I forgot to say? Because I was thinking about it, I was listening to everybody, and I was thinking about, and I think a lot of people here are from civil organizations, and I think about how important they are these days. And when I was listening to everybody, that those groups, when they have come together and created something or done something differently, they often become instructive to policymakers. So for instance, the City of Toronto talks a lot about land stewardship and writing relations. But, Green a City established a garden that is a medicinal garden and took parkland that they were given as gardening space and turned it into a garden. The same thing with this initiative that Opal was speaking about, the work to create a social medicine hub. There is government support for that, but this housing is being created by civil organizations. The land that we're on in Green a City is an intentional land trust, right? That is being built. The Parkdale has the lowest amount of green space in all of Toronto. And if we didn't, we could have, just kept lobbying for that, but instead we took an opportunity to work with folks to create the land trust, turn the land trust into a growing space. And then that also is helping to leverage the development of more social housing. So those kinds of ways of us innovating and trying things out, I think really set a policy framework for people going forward. And yeah.
Oh my God, so pleased that you're championing like civic and civic organizations and the leadership that they demonstrate all the time. So thanks so much, Lynn. Did anybody want to add to that? Nadine, your microphone, or Opal? Yep. Nadine, maybe first and then Opal. Unless
No.
you're okay. Okay, so Opal, you jump in, and then I do have a question for you, Nadine.
Yeah.
Organizations like West Neighborhood House move from being just direct service providers to really being culturally sensitive, and even having a department that deals with race relations as well as cultural sensitivity. It establishes a place for policy to be developed. And when places like West Neighborhood House do community consultations, and when you have a large population of staff where people are encouraged to give their input without recrimination, then that is how change takes place. Having Greenest City amalgamate with West Neighborhood speaks to the times, because a lot of organizations are amalgamating, which means that there's less funds to go around, but at least by collaborating, more change is evident. Eminent, I mean.
Yeah.
The other thing, I'm going to let other people.
Thanks, Opal. No worries. Thank you for that contribution. Also, Nadine, I wanted to ask you, just changing the tack a little bit here. But I really wanted to give you an opportunity to speak a little bit more about a better tent city, but really for those that haven't gone to your website to learn about the program, I strongly encourage this. But you write on the website that a better tent city is better than sleeping rough, that the space itself got better when it transitioned from tents to cabins, when other services were added, and you got access to the food bank, to the community kitchen, and then a methadone clinic. It's definitely better today, but it's not all better. You envision a time when the right to housing is truly understood as a human right, and everyone has access to a safe and supported, respectful alternative to living rough. Can you tell me what that looks like for you and how we get there?
So it looks a lot more safe, affordable, and accessible housing is being built. It's less, if you don't have a reference from a landlord, then you can never find a place. It looks like shelters are treating people more human-like, with dignity and respect. How do we get there? We need political will for change, to create more opportunities for people to stabilize their life, to create more housing, to reduce poverty by making sure people can afford to live. It's hard to live with the money that people get, and everything is going up. And with the OWODSP, you can't find a room to rent for what you get. So that's why a lot of people are living in shelters right now. And we need more support. We need more places like a Better Tent City, where the people that live here can have their meals served to them. Like they get here, we get 3 meals a day and snacks, or like there's always food here. But we have had a couple people who have moved out of our tiny home and they come back for food, they will have their place and they'll tell me, you know, Nadine, I can't afford to eat. So they do have to access our service or they go to the soup kitchen. So that's the other thing. So it's just all these things.
Yeah.
And if we do all of that, things will work for
Yeah.
the people.
Yeah. Thank you. It's, you know, there are a number of things, but, you know, just like, you know, the diversity of activities that are happening just in this panel discussion, like in the everyday, hopefully we can start to see some change build up. I'd like to turn to Rowan to help us focus on another area of investigation. I know coming out of the discovery phase of the lab from all of the workshops and so on, you know, there was a focus now on fostering cross-sector collaborations, as I say, an all-in approach. We need to recognize that interconnectedness of housing, of health, of well-being, social infrastructure, and climate resilience. Really only in working across sectors and collaborating can we hope to really see the change happening. And frankly, you know, this is sort of the interconnected challenge of our time. I suspect that you see this understanding with young people, maybe that they get this collaboration is needed intuitively. I might be wrong. You know, where do you see this happening, perhaps in a way that could inspire others?
Oh, what a wonderful question. And yeah, I was really grateful to be a part of the Climate and Equity Lab with SI Canada and Gore Mutual earlier this year. Yeah, I think to your point, definitely. I would say young people are, and I would argue most people working on the ground, whatever community you're part of, you really see the value. Opa was just speaking to it. It's just like the importance of collaboration. Nadine was speaking to it in terms of all of the services being able to be accessible and available in one space. Like there is that next level when we're looking at more of a systemic approach of wanting to think about cross collaboration at that level. But I think people on the ground know and breathe that every single day. And so, yeah, I think as an organization and in the work that we do and all of the youth that we work with, that's pretty common sense that we need to be solving. I think the kind of buzzword, academic word of the day is multi-solving, that we need to be creating solutions that that are not just solving one issue. We're not just talking about housing, but we're talking about housing and climate change and well-being and all of these other facets together. In terms of kind of good examples, I think there's just almost too many to name. And I think one of the interesting things about this moment is, despite us all technically being able to access each other in new ways over COVID, the lack of us being able to gather together in person, I think really saw us stall out for about 2.5 to 3 years of a lot of those collaborations at a regional or national, provincial level. And I'm only now starting to see a bit of a kind of pendulum swing in the opposite direction, where there are gatherings like this where we're really trying to intentionally bring together people from across sectors to talk about issues. But yeah, when you shared, I will admit, I got to kind of think about this question ahead of today. I was really struggling to nail down just like one really crystal clear example to give you, because I think it's happening everywhere. I think you could kind of look in whatever neighborhood you're in and you will see the collaborations happening. And I don't think it's just young people. I think it's a whole bunch of different communities that are doing it really, really well. And so I think we just need to look at how are we replicating that model at a systems change level, and not just relying on the grassroots level to do that well.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that, Rowan. And you know, I guess it all goes to how people believe systems change. It is all of those community activities happening individually, and it's also how they contribute collectively towards change. And those that are working, like, you know, like the Climate and Equity Lab, working perhaps at higher up in the system, but connecting down and with and through other communities as well. So I think it's a both end for this kind of work and this kind of collaboration. As I suspected, there's really not enough time to speak to all of the work that you all are involved in. And I know that I sent you more questions than I have time to ask. I so appreciate all of your contributions to today. And I need to wrap this conversation component up and introduce also our final speaker for today, but I just want to share my gratitude with you, to all of you. Nadine Green of A Better Tent City, Opal Sparks with Greener City in Toronto, and also Lynn Walcott with West Neighbourhood House, and Rowan Sylvester, Gentleman Sylvester of City Hive in Vancouver. Thank you so much. I so appreciate everything that you've shared today. So before we wrap up, I want to introduce Gabby Polenko Soto. She's the Vice President and Head of Purpose and Sustainability at Gore Mutual Insurance Company. And Gore actually launched the Climate and Equity Lab in 2023 to better understand the current activity, needs, and knowledge gaps the impact of climate change has on vulnerable and equity-seeking groups in Canada. And she's joining us today. She's a ton of experience herself, and I'm sure has many insights to also share, but she's got some exciting news as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Gabby. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. And I also want to express my gratitude to all of you, not only for the wealth of knowledge that you generously share with our communities, and also the time that you took to participate in the first phase of the Climate and Equity Lab. What I thought I would do is just share a little bit about why we decided to invest in launching the Climate and Equity Lab. And I want to first say that it was really co-created. It was not something that was structured that we were asked to fund, but rather it was co-created with Social Innovation Canada and York University's Faculty of Environment and Urban Change. And the reason it was co-created, and it took about a year of dialogue to really identify what this opportunity was going to look like, was that the one thing that I knew for sure, having been in the corporate granting space for a long time, is that the way that companies approach community investment is not working. And we need to find a different approach. And one of the things that we really wanted to do is actually invest in understanding the problem with individuals that have lived experience, that have been advocating for this work for a very long time, because the impact of climate on vulnerable groups is not new. And identifying an opportunity to actually bring different stakeholders together in an environment of trust, where we could share that knowledge and actually help to elevate that knowledge to the people that need to hear it. And so for us, you know, Social Innovation Canada was one of those groups that is at the forefront of this. And for us, it was not only important to make sure that the right people had a spot at the table, but that we were passing them the mic, and that they had an opportunity and the time to really express their lived experience, their incredible knowledge, and elevate that as part of the next phase that we're going to launch in September. But understanding those 5 levers of change were really important. The next thing is that for us, it was a coming together of shared values between York U, SI Canada, and us, in terms of sharing all of the insights and learnings from the first phase of the Climate and Equity Lab publicly. That was the absolute grounding force. And the reason for that was that I think is a respect to the individuals that have participated in the labs, to say, well, no one is going to own the results and the knowledge that come out of this, but this is going to help to actually influence other organizations, other companies, and other individuals that are really interested in this space. And to really be frank, we've had to make decisions as a group of actually turning down funding by organizations that do not meet those requirements, that aren't open to sharing this publicly, that they're approaching it from a genuine place of trust. Because for us, hopefully the trust that we've built with the participants of the first phase of Climate and Equity Lab is the foremost thing that we need to protect if we can really move this work forward. So in terms of the exciting announcement, it ties back to one of the reasons why we really felt strongly about launching the lab. And one of those reasons was specifically that the nature of corporate grant making, we as corporates have created an environment of competition amongst the charitable sector. And we know, even from all the dialogue here, that collaboration among the sector is incredibly important. And so as part of the launch of the report of the first phase of the Climate and Equity Lab, we are launching today a granting program where we've set aside $250,000 for 5 $50,000 grants that are specifically going to a partnership initiative. So looking for charities, nonprofits, social enterprises that are working on the space of the intersection of climate, equity, and poverty to actually come together and propose either an initiative that's already in place or something that you want to co-build, and we're going to fund that through those grants. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put a link in the chat to the granting cycle. We also engage with charities before we launch anything. So we're not looking for big proposals. There is a letter of interest. That's all we need from the organizations that want to apply for this grant. That document also tells you exactly what we're looking for. And that was co-created with charitable partners as well to make sure that it's not onerous for any size organization to participate. But are really excited to launch this and to try to foster this type of approach to community investment with other corporate grant makers. And that really is something that we're hoping to generate in addition to everything else that we've done with the lab within this space. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Geraldine.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Gabby. And just to let everybody know that's on the call and who will be listening to this recording, we'll send out links, that same link, as well as the discovery report that is now launched as a result of the end of the first phase of the Climate and Equity Lab. So that really brings us to the end of this first possibility space event. In terms of areas for possibility, I think we've heard a lot today that feeds into ideas moving forward as well. Now you have Gore putting forward some grants to help investigate some of those possibilities even more. So follow up with Gabby on that score. Again, thank you so much to the guests here today, to Opal and Nadine and Rowan and Lynn. As I said before we started the call, we can host an event, but we're just providing the platform. You are the innovators doing the work every day, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights today. I also want to thank my colleagues, Kathleen and Emma, again, for preparing this platform to share with you. Our intention with the possibility space is to host these quarterly throughout the year. So pay attention as we go into the fall for our next event. If you've joined us for the first time and like what you hear, please subscribe to our monthly newsletter to stay up to date on upcoming events and also any news coming out of the lab or from Social Innovation Canada in general. We're right at the hour now, so I wish you well for the rest of your day and for the rest of the week. Wherever today's event finds you, stay well, and thank you again for joining us in the possibility space. Take care.